The alarms had not even finished echoing through the holding block when I walked in, and already I could feel my pulse rising, not from fear, but from excitement. I am Naira Voss, daughter of matriarch Elira Voss, and on that day, I believed I understood everything about power. I was wrong, but I did not know that yet. The processing facility smelled of metal and ash, the scent that clings to every place where prisoners of war are kept. Guards in gray armor lined the corridor, their weapons resting but ready. Rows of cells stretched ahead of me, holding soldiers from a dozen conquered worlds. Some screamed, some wept, most simply stared at the floor, broken by defeat. Then I saw him. He sat alone in the last cell, separated from the others by a thick wall of reinforced glass. His uniform was torn, his face marked with dried blood, yet he did not slump like the others. He sat upright, his eyes calm, his breathing steady, as if the chains around his wrists were nothing more than an inconvenience. A human. I had heard of them before, of course. Every noble in the empire had heard the stories, the rumors of a young species that had somehow held its ground against forces far greater than itself. But hearing stories and standing before one of them were two very different things. I stepped closer to the glass, studying him the way one studies an insect trapped in resin. "So this is the great human resistance," I said, letting my voice carry the practiced arrogance of my upbringing. I expected something more impressive. He lifted his eyes to meet mine. There was no anger in them, no fear either, just a quiet, unsettling patience, like a predator waiting for the right moment to move. "You'll get used to being disappointed," he said. The guards beside me stiffened, waiting for my reaction. I laughed, a sharp, cold sound meant to remind him exactly who held the power in this room. "Disappointed? You are the one in chains, soldier. Your fleets are scattered. Your homeworld trembles at the mention of our name. And yet you sit there as if you have already won something." He tilted his head slightly, studying me the same way I had studied him only moments before, as though I were the one being measured and found wanting. "You talk a lot for someone who doesn't know what she's talking about," he said. I felt heat rise in my chest, the sting of being spoken to as an equal by a creature I considered barely worth noticing. I stepped closer to the glass, my reflection ghosting over his calm face. "Careful, human. Words like that have ended lives far more important than yours." "Then it should be easy for you," he said, "to have me killed." Something in the way he said it made the guards exchange uneasy glances. I noticed it, but my pride refused to let the moment pass without one final blow. "Perhaps I will ask my mother for that privilege," I said. It would be a fitting end for the last human soldier we managed to capture. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not fear, something closer to amusement, the kind of look a person gives when they know something you do not. "The last one," he repeated softly. "Is that what they told you?" I opened my mouth to respond, but one of the guards, a broad-shouldered officer named Doran, placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "My lady," he said quietly, "we should not linger here. This prisoner is under special classification." "Special classification?" I repeated, glancing at him. "He is a soldier from a defeated species. What could possibly make him special?" Doran's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he would refuse to answer. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "The order came directly from your mother's command staff. No noble is to interact with this prisoner without her personal authorization." A cold unease crept into my chest, though I refused to let it show on my face. My mother rarely concerned herself with individual prisoners. She commanded fleets, negotiated treaties, decided the fate of entire worlds. Why would one human soldier warrant her personal attention? I turned back to the glass. The prisoner was still watching me, his expression unreadable now, as though he had already lost interest in whatever game I thought we were playing. "What is your name, human?" I asked, trying to reclaim some sense of control over the conversation. He was silent for a long moment before answering. "Ethan Cole." "Well, Ethan Cole," I said, forcing confidence into my voice. "Enjoy your cell. It may be the last comfort you know." I turned and walked away before he could respond, my boots echoing against the metal floor. I told myself I was leaving because I had grown bored of him, that his silence was proof of his defeat. But the truth I did not want to admit, even to myself, was that something about his calmness had unsettled me more than any threat could have. As I stepped out of the holding block and into the cold evening air, I glanced back one final time. Through the narrow window of the corridor, I could see him still sitting there, motionless, watching the door long after I had gone. It was not the look of a broken soldier. It was the look of someone waiting. That night, I could not shake the feeling that I had just spoken to something far more dangerous than the Empire realized. I told myself it was foolishness, that no single soldier, no matter how strange his composure, could threaten an empire that spanned 100 worlds. But deep down, in a place I did not yet have the courage to examine, a small and stubborn doubt had already taken root, and doubt, once planted, has a way of growing whether we welcome it or not. I did not know then that the name Ethan Cole would soon be spoken in my household with the same fear reserved for storms and plagues. I did not know that my mother, the woman who had never once bowed to any living being, would kneel before this very prisoner within days. All I knew, as I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling of my chamber, was that for the first time in my life, I had looked into the eyes of someone who was not afraid of me. And that frightened me more than I was willing to admit. 3 days passed before I saw him again, and in those 3 days, my curiosity had grown into something closer to obsession. I told myself it was simple boredom, the idle interest of a noble with too much time and too little to occupy her mind. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his calm face, heard his quiet voice telling me I did not know what I was talking about. It was during those 3 days that I first heard the word that would change everything. I had gone to my mother's private study to request approval for a small matter, nothing important, a routine formality that any daughter of a matriarch could handle in moments. The door was slightly open, and before I could announce myself, I heard voices from within, low and urgent, carrying a tension I had never heard in my mother's chambers before. I stopped just outside, my hand hovering over the door. "The council wants answers," said a voice I recognized as General Threll, one of my mother's most trusted advisors. "They want to know how 3 of our finest fleets were destroyed without a single confirmed kill on the human side." "There is no answer that will satisfy them," my mother replied, her voice tight with something I had never heard from her before. "Not anger, fear. Matriarch, with respect, the council does not care about explanations. They care about results. Ashfall was supposed to be a decisive victory. Instead, it became the greatest loss in a generation." I pressed closer to the door, my heart pounding. Ashfall. I had heard the name mentioned in passing before, always in hushed tones, always followed by uncomfortable silence. I had assumed it was simply another battle, one of the countless engagements fought along the border in the endless war with Earth. "You were there, Threll," my mother said. "You saw what he did. Tell me, honestly, what answer would satisfy the council?" That one human soldier held the fate of 3 fleets in his hands and chose not to end them. My breath caught in my throat. "They will not believe it," Threll said. "They will say it is a lie meant to cover incompetence." "It is not a lie," my mother snapped, her voice sharper than I had ever heard it. "I was there. I saw the moment when our shields failed, when our weapons went silent, when every ship in that formation was defenseless before him. He had every reason to destroy us, every justification, and instead, he lowered his weapon and requested a ceasefire." I stood frozen outside that door, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. My mother, the matriarch who commanded the largest fleet in our sector, who had conquered 3 worlds before I was even born, was speaking of a single soldier with something dangerously close to reverence. "What do we call him?" Threll asked quietly. "The council will want a name for their reports." There was a long pause before my mother answered. "Warbringer," she said. "That is what our surviving officers began calling him after Ashfall. Not because of what he destroyed, but because of what he chose to spare. I do not know how long I stood there, my mind racing through possibilities, trying to reconcile the calm, quiet soldier I had mocked in his cell with the figure my mother now described in tones reserved for legends and nightmares alike. It did not seem possible. Ethan Cole had been chained, wounded, alone. He had shown no sign of the power my mother spoke of. And yet, something in the way he had looked at me, that quiet patience, that unshakable calm, suddenly took on a different meaning. I stepped back from the door, my thoughts spinning, and made my way quickly down the corridor before anyone could discover I had been listening. I needed to see him again. I needed to understand what I had truly encountered in that cell. The next morning, I made my way back to the holding facility, determined to confront the mystery for myself. But when I arrived, the guards at the entrance stopped me before I could even reach the corridor. "My lady," said one of them, a young officer whose name I did not recognize, "the prisoner has been moved." "Moved where?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "To the isolation wing, my lady. Level 9 security. Only personnel with direct authorization from the matriarch may enter." Level 9. I had never even heard of such a classification before. The highest security wings I knew of were reserved for the most dangerous criminals in the Empire, beings capable of destroying entire cities, saboteurs who had nearly toppled the government itself. Why would a single captured soldier warrant such measures? I spent the following days trying to gather more information, listening at doors I had no business listening at, asking careful questions of servants and guards who might know more than they realized. What I learned only deepened the unease growing inside me. The soldiers who had survived Ashfall refused to speak of it in detail. Those who did spoke in fragments, describing a battle unlike anything they had witnessed before. They spoke of a lone human vessel that had somehow disabled 3 capital ships without firing what most would consider a killing blow. They spoke of communications intercepted mid-battle, of a voice that had remained eerily calm even as our forces begged for their lives. One officer, an older woman named Kessa, who had served under my mother for decades, was the only one willing to speak to me directly, though even she chose her words carefully. "You should not concern yourself with matters above your position, young lady," she said when I found her in the officers' mess hall. "Ashfall is not a subject for idle curiosity." "I am not asking out of idle curiosity," I said. "I spoke with him, the prisoner, Ethan Cole." Kessa's expression shifted immediately, her composure cracking just slightly. "You spoke with Warbringer?" The name, spoken aloud so casually, sent a chill through me. "I mocked him," I admitted, the words feeling heavier than I expected. "I told him he should be grateful for the mercy of being captured rather than killed." Kessa set down her cup slowly, staring at me with an expression I could not quite place. Pity, perhaps, or warning. "Then you owe him an apology," she said quietly, "though I doubt he requires one. Why does everyone speak of him as though he is something more than a soldier?" Kessa glanced around the room before leaning closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Because he could have ended us at Ashfall, and chose not to. Do you understand what that means? An enemy who holds absolute power over your fate and decides mercy is more valuable than victory. That is not the behavior of a simple soldier, young lady. That is the behavior of someone operating on a different level of strength entirely, the kind that does not need to prove itself through destruction." I sat in silence, trying to absorb her words. "What happened to the fleets after the ceasefire?" I asked finally. "They were allowed to retreat," Kessa said. "All of them, every surviving vessel, every surviving crew member, permitted to return home unharmed. He did not ask for surrender. He did not demand tribute. He asked only that we remember what almost happened and that we think carefully before engaging his people again." The weight of her words settled over me slowly, reshaping everything I thought I understood about the balance of power between our empire and the humans we had so casually dismissed as inferior. I thought of the calm way Ethan Cole had looked at me in his cell, the quiet patience in his voice when he told me I did not know what I was talking about. I had mistaken his composure for weakness, for the resignation of a defeated soldier accepting his fate. I had been wrong. That night, I returned to my chambers and sat alone in the darkness for hours, turning the pieces of the story over in my mind. My mother, the matriarch who feared nothing, had knelt in fear before the memory of this human. An entire fleet had been spared, not through negotiation or bargaining, but through the simple choice of one soldier who held their lives in his hands and decided against ending them. I did not know it yet, but I was about to make a mistake that would force my mother to reveal the full truth of what had happened at HFY, a truth that would shatter every assumption I had ever held about strength, about mercy, and about the true nature of the enemy we had so foolishly underestimated. The following morning, driven by a mixture of curiosity and stubborn pride I could not fully explain even to myself, I made my way back toward the isolation wing, determined to see him one more time before deciding what to do with the unsettling knowledge I now carried. I did not yet understand that this decision would change everything. The Level 9 security wing was unlike anything I had seen before in the facility. The corridors were narrower, the lighting dimmer, and the guards stationed along the walls carried themselves with a tension that told me this was not a place meant for casual visitors. I had used my mother's name to gain entry, a small deception I told myself was justified given everything I had learned in the past few days. The officer at the checkpoint hesitated when I gave my request, glancing at his companion before finally waving me through with clear reluctance. 10 minutes, he said, no more, and do not approach the containment barrier. I nodded, though I had no intention of honoring either restriction if the moment called for it. The corridor leading to his cell was quiet, almost unnervingly so. I passed empty holding rooms, their doors sealed and dark, until I reached the final chamber at the end of the hall. Unlike the previous cell, this one had no glass barrier, only a shimmering field of blue energy that pulsed gently, a containment measure I recognized as one reserved for threats considered nearly impossible to hold. Ethan Cole sat in the center of the room, still restrained, though the chains here looked heavier, more reinforced than before. He looked up as I approached, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "Back so soon," he said finally, his voice carrying the same quiet calm I remembered. "I thought you'd grown bored of disappointment." I stepped closer, my earlier confidence faltering slightly under the weight of everything I now knew. "I heard about HFY," I said. Something shifted in his expression, subtle but unmistakable. Surprise, perhaps, or something closer to careful consideration. "Did you?" he said. It was not a question. "My mother spoke of it. She called you Warbringer." He was silent for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that made me want to step back, though pride kept my feet firmly planted. "That's not a name I chose for myself," he said finally. "But it is one you earned," I countered, trying to reclaim some sense of control over the conversation, though I could feel it slipping further away with every word. "Is that what you came here to tell me? That you've heard a story secondhand and now think you understand something?" The edge in his voice, subtle as it was, struck harder than I expected. I straightened, falling back on the only defense I had ever truly known: pride. "I came here because I wanted to see for myself whether the stories were true," I said, "whether the great Warbringer is truly as dangerous as everyone claims, or whether fear has simply exaggerated the actions of one soldier who got lucky." His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, like a blade being drawn slowly from its sheath. "You want to know if the stories are true," he repeated. "Fine, ask me directly. What do you want to know?" I hesitated, unprepared for the offer. I had expected silence, perhaps even anger, not this calm invitation to simply ask. "Did you really disable 3 capital ships alone?" I asked. "Yes." "Without destroying them?" "Yes." "Why?" The question hung in the air between us, heavier than I expected it to feel. He studied me for a long moment before answering, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost none of its calm, but gained something else, something that sounded almost like weariness. "Because destroying them wouldn't have won anything," he said. "It would have ended lives that didn't need to end, and it would have made the next battle worse, not better. Mercy isn't weakness, it's a choice, and it's usually the harder one. I frowned, unable to fully reconcile his words with everything I had been raised to believe about strength and dominance. Our empire believes that mercy shown to an enemy is mercy wasted, I said. That kindness is only ever repaid with further aggression. Then your empire has never truly tested that belief, he said simply. You've only ever shown strength to those weaker than you. That's not the same as mercy. Real mercy is choosing not to destroy something when you absolutely could, and knowing it might cost you later. That's what happened at HFY. I fell silent, unsure how to respond. Everything about this conversation felt different from our first encounter, less like a battle of wits meant to establish dominance, and more like a lesson I had not asked for but somehow needed. You could have ended my mother's fleet, I said finally, almost to myself. I could have, he agreed. It would have been easy. Your shields were down, your weapons were offline, there was nothing standing between me and total victory. Then why didn't you take it? He met my eyes directly, and for the first time, I saw something beneath the calm exterior, a depth of conviction that unsettled me more than any threat could have. Because victory built on unnecessary destruction isn't really victory, he said. It's just cruelty wearing a different name. I didn't join this fight to prove how much damage I could do. I joined it to stop the damage from spreading further. I did not know how to respond to that. Everything I had been taught, every lesson drilled into me since childhood about the nature of power and dominance, suddenly felt small and hollow compared to the simple conviction in his voice. You still think we're weak, don't you? He said, watching my face carefully. Even now. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words would not come. The truth was more complicated than a simple yes or no. I think, I said slowly, that I do not understand you, and that frightens me more than I expected it to. Something in his expression softened slightly, though the calm intensity never fully left his eyes. Fear isn't a bad place to start, he said. It usually means you're finally paying attention. Before I could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor behind me. I turned to see the guard from the checkpoint approaching quickly, his expression tense. My lady, you need to leave immediately, he said. Your mother has been informed of your presence here. My stomach dropped. I had known this confrontation would come eventually, but I had not expected it so soon, and certainly not while I was standing in front of the very prisoner whose existence had thrown my entire understanding of the world into chaos. Tell her I am on my way to speak with her directly, I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. The guard hesitated, clearly uncertain whether to obey a noble's command or wait for further instruction, but eventually nodded and stepped back, allowing me a final moment. I turned back to Ethan Cole, who watched the exchange with quiet interest, as though he already understood exactly what was about to unfold. This isn't over, I said, though I was no longer certain whether the words were meant as a threat or simply an acknowledgement of the truth. No, he agreed, it isn't. I left the isolation wing with my mind racing, my earlier confidence replaced by something closer to dread. My mother had never once expressed anger toward me for minor transgressions, but I had never before defied a direct security restriction to speak with a prisoner she had personally classified as one of the most dangerous beings in our custody. The walk back through the facility felt longer than I remembered, every step echoing with the weight of the conversation I had just had. I kept replaying his words in my mind, the quiet conviction behind them, the way he had spoken of mercy not as weakness, but as a deliberate choice requiring more strength than destruction ever could. By the time I reached the transport that would carry me back to my mother's estate, I had already decided what I needed to do. I would go to her directly, admit what I had done, and demand to know the full truth of what had happened at HFY, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. I did not yet realize that my mother had already reached the same decision, and that the confrontation waiting for me at home would reveal far more than I had ever anticipated. The transport ride back to the estate passed in a blur, my thoughts consumed entirely by the strange mixture of fear and fascination that had settled over me since my conversation with Ethan Cole. I found myself replaying his words again and again, searching for the flaw in his logic, the weakness in his philosophy that would allow me to dismiss him once more as simply another defeated soldier putting on a brave face. But I could not find it. Everything about him, from the calm certainty in his voice to the quiet strength beneath his restrained exterior, suggested a being who was not performing confidence for my benefit, but who genuinely believed in the principles he described. And that, more than anything else, was what frightened me most. Our empire had built its power on the assumption that strength meant domination, that mercy was a luxury only the weak could afford. Yet here was a soldier who had proven himself capable of ending 3 of our fleets, choosing instead to show restraint, and somehow that restraint had left a deeper impression on my mother, on Kessa, on every officer who had survived Ashfall, than any display of destructive power ever could have. When the transport finally arrived at the estate, I stepped out to find my mother already waiting in the main courtyard, her expression unreadable in the fading evening light. Beside her stood General Threll, his posture rigid, his eyes carrying the same weariness I had noticed in Kessa's voice days earlier. "Naira," my mother said, her voice carrying a controlled calm that I recognized immediately as the sign of deep concern rather than anger. "We need to talk." I swallowed hard, steadying myself for whatever conversation was about to unfold. "I know about Ashfall," I said before she could continue. "I know what happened. I know what he did." My mother's expression shifted slightly, surprise flickering across her features, before settling into something more complicated, a mixture of resignation and something that almost looked like relief. "Then you understand why I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said, "because what I am about to tell you will change everything you think you know about power, about mercy, and about the true nature of the war we are fighting." I nodded, bracing myself, though nothing could have truly prepared me for what followed. My mother led me into her private study, the same room where I had listened at the door only days earlier without her knowledge. General Threll followed, closing the heavy door behind us, sealing the 3 of us inside with whatever truth my mother was finally prepared to share. She did not sit. Instead, she stood by the window, staring out at the darkening sky, her hands clasped tightly behind her back, in a posture I recognized from countless formal addresses, though this felt different, more personal, more vulnerable than anything I had seen from her before. "You went to see him," she said, not turning to face me. "Ethan Cole." "Yes," I admitted, "twice." "And what did you think of him?" The question caught me off guard. So I had expected anger, a reprimand for defying security protocols, not a genuine inquiry into my impressions. "I mocked him," I said honestly. "The first time, I called him weak. I told him his species was an afterthought." My mother's shoulders tensed slightly, though she still did not turn. "And the second time?" "The second time I listened," I said. "He spoke of mercy as a choice, not a weakness. He said destroying something you have absolute power over isn't victory, it's just cruelty, wearing a different name." My mother finally turned to face me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in her eyes I had never witnessed before. Not the calculated authority of a matriarch commanding fleets, but the raw honesty of someone who had been forever changed by an experience she still struggled to fully process. "He said the same thing to me," she said quietly, word for word, nearly. "At Ashfall, when our shields had failed and every weapon on my command ship had gone silent, I expected death. I had accepted it, prepared myself for it, the way any commander must when facing certain defeat. And then his voice came through our comm systems, calm, steady, offering a ceasefire instead of the ending I had braced for." "Why?" I asked, echoing the same question I had asked him directly. Why would he spare an enemy fleet capable of returning to fight another day? My mother was silent for a long moment before answering. "Because he understood something our empire has forgotten," she said. that true strength is not measured by how much destruction you can cause, but by how much destruction you choose to withhold. He had every justification to end us, every strategic reason, and yet he chose restraint, not because he was weak, but because he believed mercy would accomplish more than victory ever could. I thought of the calm conviction in Ethan Cole's voice, the way he had spoken of choosing not to cause unnecessary harm, even when he held all the power in the exchange. "Did it work?" I asked. "Did his mercy accomplish anything?" My mother's expression darkened slightly, and she exchanged a brief glance with General Threll before answering. "It accomplished something far more dangerous than victory ever could have," she said. "It made us question everything we believed about the humans, about their capabilities, about the nature of the war we thought we were winning. Do you understand what that means, Naira? An enemy who has already proven they could destroy us, choosing instead to demonstrate mercy, forces us to reconsider every assumption our empire has built its power upon." I sat down slowly in one of the chairs near her desk, my mind struggling to process the full weight of what she was describing. "Is that why he is being held under such extreme security?" I asked. "Not because you fear he will escape, but because you fear what he represents?" My mother nodded, her expression grim. "The council wants him executed," she said. "They see him as a symbol of humiliation, proof of our failure at Ashfall, a reminder they would rather erase than confront. But I refused their demand." "Why?" "Because executing him would prove nothing except our own fear," she said. "And because I owe him a debt I can never fully repay. My life, the lives of my crew, the lives of thousands of soldiers across 3 fleets, all spared because one soldier chose mercy over destruction. That is not a debt easily dismissed, no matter how uncomfortable it makes the council." I sat in silence, absorbing the full weight of her words, feeling the last remnants of my earlier arrogance crumble away entirely. "I mocked him," I said quietly. "I told him he should be grateful for his capture. I called his species primitive." My mother's expression softened slightly, though the intensity in her eyes remained. "Then you owe him more than an apology," she said. "You owe him understanding. And I intend to make certain you receive it." Before I could respond, she moved toward the door, gesturing for me to follow. "Where are we going?" I asked, though some part of me already suspected the answer. "Back to the facility," she said. "It is time you saw the full truth of what happened at Ashfall, not through stories or second-hand accounts, but through the man who lived it." General Threll moved to protest, his expression clearly uneasy at the prospect of returning to the isolation wing at such an hour, but my mother silenced him with a single sharp glance. "The council can question my judgment all they wish," she said, "but I will not allow my daughter to carry the same ignorance that nearly cost us everything at Ashfall." The transport ride back to the facility felt different this time, heavier somehow, weighted with the knowledge of everything my mother had just revealed. I watched her carefully throughout the journey, noticing details I had somehow overlooked before: the slight tremor in her hands, the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes kept drifting toward the window as though searching for something beyond the darkness outside. "You were afraid," I said quietly, breaking the silence between us. "At Ashfall, truly afraid." My mother did not deny it. "I have commanded fleets for over 3 decades," she said. "I have faced rebellions, invasions, betrayals from within my own ranks. I have never once felt fear the way I felt it in those final moments before his voice came through our comms. Absolute, undeniable fear, the kind that strips away every illusion of control you believe you possess." And when he offered the ceasefire, "Relief," she said, "but also something else. Something closer to awe. I had never encountered a being capable of holding such power and choosing restraint instead. It changed how I viewed strength itself." We arrived at the facility as the last light of evening faded into full darkness, the corridors illuminated by the harsh artificial glow of security lighting. The guards at the entrance straightened immediately upon seeing my mother, their earlier reluctance from before entirely replaced by rigid, immediate compliance. "Matriarch," the lead officer said, bowing slightly, "we were not informed of your visit." "This is not an official visit," my mother said. "Take us to the isolation wing, immediately." The officer hesitated only a moment before nodding, leading us swiftly through the corridors toward the same heavily guarded chamber I had visited earlier that day. My heart pounded with each step, uncertain what to expect from this encounter, knowing that whatever happened next would permanently reshape my understanding of everything I had once believed about strength, mercy, and the true nature of the war our empire had been fighting. When we finally reached the chamber, Ethan Cole looked up as the door opened, his expression shifting slightly upon seeing my mother enter behind me. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the tension in the room thick enough to feel physically present. "Matriarch Voss," he said finally, his voice carrying a quiet respect I had not expected. I wondered if we would speak again. My mother stepped forward, her posture rigid, with a mixture of authority and something far more vulnerable beneath the surface. "Release his restraints," she said, turning to the guards stationed near the entrance. The guards exchanged uncertain glances, clearly hesitant to comply with an order that violated every security protocol governing the containment of a prisoner classified at the highest possible threat level. "Matriarch, with respect," one of them began. "The council's orders explicitly state, 'I am the matriarch of this house,'" my mother interrupted, her voice carrying an authority that left no room for further argument. "I am giving you a direct order. Release him." The guards moved reluctantly to comply, the heavy restraints falling away from Ethan Cole's wrists with a metallic clatter that echoed through the silent chamber. He rose slowly, rubbing his wrists, his eyes never leaving my mother's face, watching her with the same careful, patient calm I had witnessed during both of our previous encounters. "This is unexpected," he said quietly. My mother did not respond immediately. Instead, she turned to me, her expression carrying a weight I had never seen from her before, a combination of humility and resolve that seemed almost foreign, coming from a woman who had spent her entire life commanding absolute authority over everyone around her. "Naira," she said, her voice steady despite the visible tension in her posture, "I need you to understand something, and I need you to understand it completely, without hesitation or doubt." I nodded, though I had no idea what was about to follow. My mother turned back to face Ethan Cole, and then, in a moment that shattered every assumption I had ever held about power, about pride, about the natural order of our empire's dominance over lesser species, she lowered herself slowly to one knee before him. I stood frozen, unable to process what I was witnessing. My mother, the matriarch who commanded the largest fleet in our sector, who had never once shown deference to any living being outside our own royal lineage, knelt before a human soldier with the same reverence reserved for the highest deities of our ancient traditions. "Bow before him," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent chamber. "He is the one who let our people live at Ashfall when he had every reason not to." I stood motionless, my mind struggling to reconcile the image before me with everything I had believed just days earlier. The arrogance that had defined my entire worldview crumbled in that single moment, replaced by a dawning understanding of just how deeply I had misjudged the true nature of strength. I did not move at first. My legs felt rooted to the floor, my mind still struggling to accept the image of my mother, kneeling before the very soldier I had mocked only days earlier. The guards near the entrance stood equally frozen, their expressions caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief, clearly as unprepared for this moment as I was. Ethan Cole looked down at my mother, and for the first time since I had met him, his calm composure seemed to falter, just slightly, replaced by something that looked almost like discomfort. "You don't need to do that," he said quietly, extending a hand to help her rise. "I never asked for this. That is precisely why you deserve it," my mother said, accepting his hand and rising slowly to her feet, though she did not release his hand immediately, holding it a moment longer than protocol would have allowed. "Those who demand respect rarely deserve it. Those who never ask for it are usually the ones who have earned it most." I finally found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended, the earlier confidence I had carried into this facility now entirely replaced by genuine humility. "What happened at Ashfall?" I asked. "The full truth, not fragments, not rumors. I need to understand." My mother turned to me, her expression softening slightly, though the weight of memory still lingered heavily in her eyes. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the small bench along the chamber wall. "This is not a short story." I sat, and Ethan Cole lowered himself onto the edge of his cot across from us, while my mother remained standing, her hands clasped before her as she began to recount the events that had reshaped her entire understanding of the war. "3 fleets," she began, "under my direct command, moving to secure the outer border near what your intelligence reports called a minor human outpost. We expected minimal resistance. Standard protocol suggested overwhelming force would ensure a swift, decisive victory with minimal losses on our side. We miscalculated everything," General Threll added quietly from near the doorway, his voice carrying the same weariness I had noticed in him earlier. "The outpost was not what our reports suggested, and the response we received was not what any of us expected." My mother continued, her voice steady despite the visible tension building within her. "His vessel arrived alone," she said. "A single ship against 3 full fleets. By every measure of conventional strategy, it should have ended within moments. Instead, our shields began failing in ways our engineers could not explain. Our weapons systems went silent, one by one, without any visible cause. It was as though every advantage we believed we held simply dissolved before us." "It wasn't magic," Ethan Cole said quietly, speaking for the first time since the story had begun. "It was preparation. Your fleet systems had vulnerabilities that hadn't been addressed in years. I simply knew where to look." My mother nodded, acknowledging his correction without any trace of defensiveness. "Within minutes, every ship in my formation was completely defenseless," she continued. "No shields, no weapons, no means of retreat or resistance. I remember standing on my command deck, watching the tactical display, understanding with absolute certainty that we were entirely at his mercy." "What did you feel in that moment?" I asked quietly. My mother was silent for a long moment before answering. "Terror," she said honestly, "not the calculated fear of battle, where you understand the risks and accept them as part of duty. This was something deeper, more primal. The absolute certainty that everything I had built, everything I commanded, could end in an instant, and there was nothing I could do to prevent it." "And then?" I pressed. "And then his voice came through our comm systems," she said. "Calm, measured, nothing like the triumphant declarations we expected from an enemy who held absolute victory within reach." Ethan Cole spoke then, his voice carrying the same quiet weight I had heard during our previous conversations. "I told them I wasn't interested in destroying ships that could no longer fight back," he said. "I offered a ceasefire, full retreat, no further engagement, in exchange for sparing every life aboard those vessels." "Why?" I asked again, the question feeling more urgent now than it had during our earlier conversation. "You had already won, completely. Why extend mercy to an enemy who would likely return to fight you again?" Ethan Cole considered the question carefully before answering, his eyes carrying a depth of conviction that made the answer feel less like justification and more like fundamental truth. "Because winning isn't just about defeating your enemy," he said. "It's about what kind of person you become in the process. If I destroy every ship that becomes defenseless before me, I'm not proving strength. I'm proving that the only thing separating me from someone I claim to oppose is which side I happen to be born on. Real strength means holding on to your principles even when circumstances make it easy to abandon them." I sat in silence, absorbing the weight of his words, feeling the last remnants of everything I had once believed about power and dominance crumbling away entirely. "The council saw it differently," my mother said, her voice hardening slightly. "They viewed his mercy not as strength, but as weakness to be exploited. They wanted to use the intelligence gathered from Ashfall to prepare a larger assault, believing his restraint proved humans were unwilling to fully commit to the destruction necessary for total victory." "They're wrong," Ethan Cole said simply. Restraint isn't unwillingness, it's discipline. And discipline, when tested repeatedly, tends to hold far longer than aggression ever does. Is that why they wanted him executed? I asked, looking toward General Threll. Because his mercy embarrassed them? Threll nodded grimly. The Council views this prisoner as a walking contradiction to everything our empire has built its military doctrine upon, he said. A soldier who held absolute power and chose restraint challenges the very foundation of how we justify our conquests. It is easier to eliminate that contradiction than to confront what it truly means. I turned back to Ethan Cole, studying him with a newfound understanding that replaced every ounce of arrogance I had carried into our first encounter. I am sorry, I said quietly. For what I said before, I judged you based on assumptions I never bothered to question. He studied me for a long moment before responding, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the sharpness from our earlier exchanges, replaced instead by something closer to genuine understanding. You're not the first person to judge based on assumptions, he said. And you probably won't be the last. What matters is what you do once you realize you were wrong. My mother stepped forward then, her expression carrying a renewed resolve that I recognized from countless formal addresses throughout my life, though this time, the authority in her voice carried a different purpose entirely. The Council will not accept his execution, she said firmly, not while I hold command of this sector, and they will not use the intelligence gathered from Ashfall to justify further aggression against a species that has already demonstrated a capacity for restraint our own empire struggles to match. What will you do? I asked. My mother turned to Ethan Cole, her expression softening slightly. I will petition for his release, she said. Not as a prisoner exchanged for tactical advantage, but as a gesture of genuine respect for what he demonstrated at Ashfall. If our empire hopes to survive this war without destroying everything it claims to protect, we must learn to recognize strength that does not rely on unnecessary destruction. Ethan Cole's expression shifted slightly, surprise flickering across his features for the first time since I had met him. You would risk your position for that? He asked. I would risk far more than my position, my mother said, for the chance to build something better than endless cycles of conquest and retaliation. You showed me that mercy is not weakness, Ethan Cole. It is the hardest kind of strength there is. And I intend to make certain my daughter learns that lesson far earlier in her life than I did in mine. I looked between them, feeling the full weight of everything I had witnessed over the past several days settling into something resembling clarity for the first time. The following weeks brought changes I could not have predicted when I first walked into that holding facility, mocking a prisoner I believed beneath my notice. My mother's petition to the Council sparked fierce debate, with many demanding his immediate execution as an example to other captured enemies. But my mother stood firm, presenting the full account of Ashfall not as evidence of human weakness, but as proof of a strength our empire had failed to understand. Slowly, painfully, opinions began to shift, not because the Council suddenly embraced ideals of mercy and restraint, but because the practical reality of facing an enemy capable of both overwhelming power and deliberate compassion forced even the most stubborn traditionalists to reconsider their assumptions about the war they believed they understood. Ethan Cole remained in our custody for several more weeks while negotiations continued, though the conditions of his confinement changed drastically. No longer treated as a dangerous threat to be contained through fear and restraint, he was instead granted a measure of respect that reflected the growing understanding of what he had truly demonstrated at Ashfall. I visited him often during those weeks, our conversations evolving from the sharp exchanges of our first encounter into something closer to genuine friendship. He taught me about human philosophy, about the value systems that shaped his understanding of strength and mercy, concepts so foreign to my upbringing that I found myself questioning everything I had once accepted without hesitation. Your mother made a difficult choice, he told me during one of our final conversations before his eventual release. Choosing empathy over tradition rarely earns easy victories, but it's usually the choice that matters most in the long run. I thought of my own transformation over those weeks, from the arrogant noble who had mocked him without hesitation, to someone who now understood, with painful clarity, just how narrow and flawed my original worldview had been. "I used to believe strength meant never showing weakness," I said. "Never bending, never yielding, never allowing anyone to see vulnerability." "And now," he asked. "Now I understand that the greatest strength often looks like restraint," I said. "Like choosing mercy when destruction would be easier. Like admitting you were wrong, even when pride tells you to defend your original position." Ethan Cole smiled slightly, the first genuine smile I had seen from him since our initial meeting. "You learned that faster than most," he said. "Some people never learn it at all." On the day of his release, my mother stood beside me as the transport prepared to carry him back toward human-controlled territory. The negotiated terms finally settled after weeks of difficult debate. The council had not fully embraced the ideals my mother championed, but a fragile agreement had been reached, one that acknowledged, however reluctantly, the reality of what mercy could accomplish where conquest alone had repeatedly failed. "This isn't the end of the war," Ethan Cole said as he prepared to board the transport, turning back to face us one final time. "But maybe it's the beginning of something different, something better than what came before." My mother nodded solemnly, extending her hand toward him in a gesture I now understood carried far more weight than any formal salute could have conveyed. "Thank you," she said simply, "for teaching an old commander that strength and mercy are not opposites, but partners, when wielded with genuine conviction." He accepted her hand, then turned to me, offering the same gesture with a warmth that reflected the unlikely friendship that had formed between us over those transformative weeks. "Remember what you learned here," he said, "not just about me, but about yourself. The world needs more people willing to question what they've been taught, especially when that questioning leads toward greater understanding rather than away from it." I nodded, unable to fully articulate the depth of gratitude I felt toward a man I had once dismissed so casually, so cruelly, without ever bothering to understand the truth behind his quiet, unwavering strength. As the transport disappeared into the horizon, carrying Ethan Cole back toward the world he called home, I stood beside my mother, watching the sky long after the ship had vanished from sight, understanding with absolute certainty that the lesson I had learned in that isolation chamber would shape every decision I made for the rest of my life. Strength, I finally understood, was never about how much power you held over others. It was about what you chose to do with that power when everything depended on the choice you made. And mercy, freely given when destruction would have been so much easier, was the truest measure of strength I would ever witness.